Yeah, and after all this excitement, we have another amazing keynote speaker lined up for you. Her name is Lydia Zigomo. Lydia is a Zimbabwean human rights lawyer with over 20 years of experience in human development, currently working as the Global Programs Director at Oxfam International in London. And she knows like no other how with all these global changes the world is facing right now, international development organizations such as Oxfam must adapt and transform. So she will be speaking about Oxfam's experiences to implement local leadership, what best to do, what not to do, and what they aim to do in the future. She has been head of the East Africa region at WaterAid, chair of the Zimbabwe Women's Coalition, as well as the Zimbabwe Women's Network in the UK, national director of the Zimbabwe Women's Lawyers Association, board member of both the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum and the Legal Resources Foundation in Zimbabwe. So you can understand that we are very honored to have her with us today. Please give a warm welcome to Lydia Zigomo. Oh, no? Oh, no, yeah. Lydia, the floor is yours. Oh, I think we have some audio issues. We're fixing it now.
Hi.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, great.
The stage is yours.
Thank you. I can hear you, and I hope you can see me.
Yeah, we can.
All right. I was asked to speak on the issue of sorry, have I lost?
Still hear you on the screen.
Oh,
Loud
you can.
clear.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I seem to have lost you at all. Okay, sorry. It was my technical glitch on my side. I was asked to talk to you about Oxfam's experiences in implementing local leadership, some of the best practices and challenges and ambitions. So I'll be speaking from that perspective of what I've seen within the work that Oxfam has been trying to do. And I've also been dipping in and out of some of the sessions that we've had throughout the day. And I think it ties in very well some of what I'm going to be sharing with some of the other speakers that I heard throughout the day in terms of what they're learning and also what they're doing in this area. So I chose to speak about it from two angles. One is actually in respect of our partnership work, and then the other angle is in respect of Oxfam's own journey to change internally as an organization. So one is the relationship with our partners and how that's changing. The second is actually what Oxfam is doing to change itself to be a better partner. In terms of the issues that are confronting us, is of course the whole call in the decolonization agenda to work differently. And of course, as Oxfam, we had signed up to the Grand Bargain, and so we have commitments we have signed up to also externally about how we're going to work in partnership and how we're going to promote local leadership. So in that spirit, it's been quite a journey in terms of understanding all the different partners that actually Oxfam works with. And this may be similar to many other international organizations. We work with local organizations, and you're talking about the leaders of those local organizations. You're talking about local communities and their leaders. And in communities, the leadership takes many different forms, from religious to political to social leaders. You're talking about national organizations and how they are working and their leadership in that space. And from a systems thinking around the sector as a whole, you're also talking about local authorities who often have the primary responsibility for providing support, providing basic services to their communities, and also in many cases, in many countries now, responding to humanitarian needs of their communities when a crisis hits. So, and on Oxfam's journey, one of the things we began to also unpack was thinking beyond what I call the usual suspects, understanding actually that there are many who are not at the table of our partnerships, and therefore we're not having that engagement and understanding about what local leadership and localization actually means from their perspective. And so in the last couple of years, a more deliberate focus on youth, women's rights organizations, and other types of organizations that represent different marginalized groups and communities within our society. So this work has been part of what we've been trying to really get a handle on. Who are our partners that we're talking about, and when we talk about local leadership. Lastly, there's another category that has been also featuring in many regions, which is actually the small scale private sector. These are your traders, your women's groups, associations, farmers groups, etc., who are often very much on the marginalization of their sectors and the need to be supported on their journey to be also inputting and sitting at the table where big decisions are being made in their sectors. So it's quite a range of partnerships when we talk about partnering and then supporting local leadership. So in terms of the grand bargain that I talked about earlier, we had signed up to that as Oxfam. And one of the commitments, of course, is around increased funding going to partners. But going beyond this to quality of that funding has been something we've been more and more looking at. We are fortunate that we've been able to create quite a big dashboard and database looking at various aspects of our partnering. And that information, someone said in an earlier session, if you don't measure it, you won't be able to focus on it. And I think that's so important. If you're not measuring something, you probably are not going to be paying attention to it, and you're not going to be able to invest in it and actually see progress in that area. So one of the things was about actually getting our systems right in terms of understanding those partnerships and what was happening within them. And within that, we're able to now interrogate things like not just what type of money, how much money is going to partners, but what type of money. Because we find that often the money that's going to partners is what we would call project-based or restricted income. So grant-based funding, which is, because it's project-based, may be then limited in terms of the number of years or time period that it is in operation for. It's to deliver a project rather than necessarily the institutional strengthening of those partners. And it is to further whatever the goals of the donor and the INGO have agreed upon. So what type of funding is it? And are we also, as Oxfam, giving more of our what we call unrestricted money to partners, and beginning to see what are the percentages that are being revealed in our annual reports when we're monitoring this. Also basic data around the number of partnerships you have, the types of partnerships, in which areas are they overrepresented and underrepresented in the strategic areas of our work, in which locations are they overrepresented and underrepresented, etc. And also the types of partnership between funded partnerships and unfunded partnerships. All of this, I think, is important to interrogate within a context where we're being challenged more and more by local actors about the role local actors play within the sector, and in terms of whether we are actually honoring some of our commitments as Oxfam around southernizing global balance, really moving power and being aware of our own power and privilege, and actually seeking to change that deliberately in terms of the ways we work with partners and show up to partners as a good partner. What we realized as we interrogate some of this data is, I think, and this again, I think is not necessarily only for Oxfam, I think it applies across the sector. What is the danger of instrumentalizing partners? And as we interrogate the data that is coming through our system, are we able to actually say that these are true partnerships? Are they becoming more equal partnerships? Whose goals are being pursued? Is it really a collaboration and joint endeavor, or is it still very much ourselves as the INGO at the table driving the agenda with the donor? Also, in terms of the funding, is it going to not just the projects, but also to supporting the institutional needs of those local partners and actors? And are we seeing a lessening of dependence on us as an institution? And are they being able more and more to actually go after funding in their own right and to grow in the way that they would want to grow, and address the needs on the ground in the way they would want to address them? And so from that perspective, I picked out two very quick examples that I think are useful around this. But I must say, before I give those examples, one of the things that this work on partnership does reveal is a challenge around our own internal capacities to partner well and move away from the traditional, basically donor grantee type of arrangement, which requires certain soft skills within your staff. But also a very key blocker can be your systems. And if the systems are not enabling to work with partners in a different way, then that can actually incentivize the wrong behaviors in terms of the ways of partnering. So in terms of the two examples I wanted to quickly share, one is the Somalia Nexus Consortium. And I always share this one because I think it's such a good example of an initiative where a group of leaders, and when I say leaders, it is leaders of certain Somalian NGOs and also some counterparts in a number of INGOs like Oxfam, Save and Care, came together in a collective to really begin to think differently about how they wanted to work in Somalia. And the INGOs took a very clear role of support and facilitation, and the leadership role was going to be played by the national NGOs. What that enabled was from the very beginning was a dynamic of changing the power relationships between the INGOs and the national NGOs. And by playing the leadership roles and the active roles of implementing and leading in every aspect the work of this consortium, the national NGOs rose to prominence. They led in the development of the strategy and plans, the resource mobilization, the programming initiatives. The INGOs like Oxfam and others provided backing and opened the doors to donors, supported and lobbied those donors to work differently, but supported the national NGOs in the initial development of relevant proposals, understanding how to approach these donors and win, and also negotiate in a way that it's also their interests are being served, and then providing the sort of business support because of course the INGOs had the systems, so providing that back office business support. The national actors led in every other way, and this led, I think, to initially supporting the national NGOs in the consortium, but over time, the national NGOs in the consortium having the ability and the independence to actually negotiate directly with donors, be approached directly by donors, and actually further the work of the consortium, of the Nexus consortium in that way. And I find that a very good example of how it also speaks to the changing role and nature of international NGOs if we're truly going to be pushing localization and local leadership. The other aspect of this work, which was not necessarily related but became useful, was another initiative that is Oxfam were taken on around collaborating with actors in the system in Somalia to take a more systematic and systems approach to creating an enabling environment for localization as a whole. The context needed to change, because if the context doesn't change, no matter how much the actors change in the context, then they're faced by a brick wall that they can still not actually realize the ambitions of what we're seeking to do, which is to change the current relationships in a way that creates more equal relationships within the sector. So the approach adopted has been to support a participatory process of reviewing the progress of commitments to localization within the country. And this is not a country which is easy to operate in, but they've been able to do that over a period of time. So over the last 6 years, being able to, and taking a research-based approach, participatory research-based approach, working at federal level within the states, and at state level, then looking at INGOs and how their practice and how they are behaving, NGOs and local organizations and the donors. All of it with an aim of trying to create the impetus of understanding what are the barriers to localization within the country, and how to work together as different actors to actually remove those barriers. So a systematic tracking with the independent reviews undertaken. They are shared, they're discussed, they're documented, and then after a cycle of work of time, a further review being undertaken to see what is changing by over time within the Somali context, and is it creating the right enabling environment for local leadership and localization to actually flourish. Because at the end of the day, the barriers to localization are not just about INGOs or even just donors. It's also the attitudes of national governments to their own organizations and organizing and civic space. And therefore, you do need all the players to actually understand they have a role and a stake to play. The other quick example I was just going to share was from Kenya, where in that case, it was both a change internally within the organization, moving away from direct humanitarian responses delivery to actually moving to a stage where our role was changing because the context in the country of Kenya was changing. So there was devolution, there was more power being given to local government and county government. They were given primary responsibilities around public services and even on issues of disaster risk reduction and humanitarian responses. And a need to think about working differently in that space. So this is also about being responsive to the changing context. And in that space, being aware that some of these county governments were actually given a budget around the issues they were supposed to be responsible for. So it's no longer about necessarily always INGOs coming to the table with a budget, but how do you become a technical partner that supports and facilitates the creation of an enabling environment for what we, for our agenda, which is still localization and seeing the role of local actors improving and taking prominence within those spaces. And that work has involved different aspects. Part of it has been around supporting governments to develop the appropriate systems at different levels for poverty and vulnerability mapping and monitoring, the extension of social protection programs and safety nets, and supporting governments to think about how they're using their local governments, how they're using their devolved powers and authorities and budgets, and where they should be directing their resources to deliver. For instance, in responding to a humanitarian crisis, the role and importance of local actors, NGOs, community-based organizations, etc., and how they can be working better with them themselves and directly. And lastly, the INGOs, from the perspective of Oxfam, one of the things that as an INGO we've been able to bring to the table was also the facilitator, connector role and brokering role around the use of technology. So linking those where the technological developments and solutions are lying to bring them to bear into, for instance, humanitarian sector. So the role of mobile telecommunications companies in this respect and the role they can play. So the role private sector can play together with local actors and government to actually deliver on humanitarian responses in a better way. So I think this speaks to what's possible with partners, but it does call on a change internally in terms of understanding how our role is changing, which may mean that maybe to some extent our identity as NGOs is changing. The need to change is necessary if we're going to maintain relevance and legitimacy, but also if we're really going to walk the talk about changing the power and privilege dynamics that within which we operate, because we know that the aid sector does come with that baggage to the table because of the colonial history within which it is rooted. So internally in Oxfam, we've been looking at all of these elements, and I think we made a commitment on all of this. It's in our strategic documents, and it's been part of what we're really paying attention to, how we decolonize, how we southernize, how we ourselves also achieve global balance internally. Because if we cannot partner internally as a confederation well, then we're not going to be a good partner to anybody else externally. So it's also been about our governance and ways of working. And more recently, we've been looking at also racial justice and what that means within creating a diverse workforce. So it's been really three elements, I would say, that speak to this, that are the main focuses of this, four elements, sorry, that are the main focuses of this work. Part of the work has been about increasing the number of members or affiliates, as we call them, within Oxfam from the Global South. And I think some of your earlier presentations were around questioning also the southernization of INGOs. And now this has been necessary because unless also you look at your internal balance, you are not going to be any different if the dominant voice and only voice is from the north. So part of that was also to change some of the power dynamics internally. It's not without its challenges. The struggle is to ensure that the southern affiliates are not just a carbon copy of their northern counterparts, being able to identify and strengthen and actually articulate what is the value addition and benefits that come from this kind of a network confederation, and having southern affiliates at the table. What do they bring that may not be necessarily money, and how, and using that to question how power and privilege operate within the confederation or network of the global organization. The other area of work has been about opening up and diversifying our governance through the creation of a more independent Oxfam International Board, and also a stakeholders assembly to whom Oxfam would be more accountable. So really bringing in independent external voices to begin to also be honoring our commitment to be accountable beyond and within, from not just from within ourselves as an organization, talking to ourselves. The third dimension has been looking at our staff, our people and our culture, and seeking to engage with the decolonization discussion, acknowledging with humility our own colonial heritage, understanding how power and privilege work within our confederation, and how to support greater diversity, especially at managerial and leadership levels. As national staff have more room and voice to speak up also, it's interesting because some of the things that come with that is they contest the way in which, for instance, we do our influencing and campaigning work. Who's shaping that? Whose worldview is dominating? And does that, what the organizations say, represent the actual views and positions of even our national staff and the actual people for and for whom we are advocating, and on behalf of whom we're advocating? So it brings interesting dynamics and potential tensions, but it can also be the strength in terms of allowing for that robust debate and but respectful discussion and debate to shape a truly collective influencing agenda. I think the other challenge I would say, sorry, it's actually only three points I was going to talk to, so I'm going to be ending now. As I say that, when I reflect on all of this, both the external and the internal, it is what I see at the heart of all of this for the journey of any INGO that is seeking to really change and transform. And we have to change and transform, because if we don't, we will soon become irrelevant. And we may find we're forced to close our doors, not that we close them ourselves. And that would be a shame. I think it's better to be changing yourself than to be changed. And but it does require the courage of conviction and ability to articulate a clear vision, and taking your people with you, because it's not that everybody will get it, even internally, even from this, what we call the so-called global south. It is about understanding and having that ability to hold the course on this journey of transformation, because there will be dissenters and those who oppose the direction of travel, not because they're bad people. It's not that they also don't want something that's good for the communities or for themselves, but because it's change, and change is difficult for many of us. And it's also about tackling power and privilege, which is painful work. It involves some level of loss for those who have held more power and privilege, before you get to the potential to explore what the opportunities are presented in the new horizons which you're trying to get to. So not everyone is right for the journey, and not many may be right for all parts of the journey. And all of us may have times when we're on the journey and may have to leave and others join. But what will happen is, as long as we hold the course and continue with that journey, we will begin to see the benefits of the journey we're making. So it's balancing the opportunities to allow people to grieve for what is becoming the past, the end of an era, if you can call it that, but also celebrating some of the achievements that came in that era, but understanding we now need to look forward to a different reality of our future. But that future needs all of us to engage with it and move in the right direction. So if I was wrapping up, that's what I would say about the overall experiences of Oxfam on this journey. We're still on it, and I hope that's been useful. But I think it resonates with a lot of what I also heard during the day in the discussions that have been happening. And thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Lydia, for your inspirational speech. And yeah, very lovely to have you here.